Okay, so you want to own a tattoo shop, rent a storefront, hang some flash art on the walls, hire a couple of talented artists, and watch the money roll in every time a needle touches skin. Here is what nobody tells you before that dream takes over. A small, single-artist tattoo studio in a low-cost area can technically open for as little as $15,000. You could save that up in a year working a normal job. And yet the tattoo industry has one of the highest new shop failure rates of any small business. Because most owners have no idea they're actually running a licensed medical adjacent facility disguised as a creative studio, and that is the economics of the tattoo business. And by the time this is over, you are going to understand exactly why. When you open a tattoo shop, you are not opening an art studio. You are not opening a business where talent alone keeps the lights on. You are opening a facility that, in most states and countries, is legally regulated closer to a medical clinic than a retail store. Bloodborne pathogen protocols, sterilization equipment inspected by your local health department, a shop license that has to be renewed, sometimes annually, sometimes with a surprise inspection attached. Every single needle that touches a client's skin is a regulatory event. The shop and the artist inside it are often two completely separate financial entities. Most tattoo artists are not employees. They're either paying you rent for a chair or splitting their earnings with you on commission, which means your income as the owner doesn't come from tattooing at all in a lot of shops. It comes from running the infrastructure other people tattoo inside of. Here is where things get genuinely varied, because tattoo shop covers an enormous range of businesses. At the very bottom, a home-based or single-chair studio in a rural or low-cost market can open for $15,000 to $30,000. Move up to a standard single-location storefront studio, and total startup costs typically land between $24,000 and $50,000 once you account for lease deposits, build-out, sterilization equipment, licensing, and initial supply inventory. A larger multi-artist shop in a major city, the kind with 4 to 6 stations and a proper retail front, can run $75,000 to $150,000 or more. And at the top end, a premium studio concept, the kind built as an investment vehicle with hospital-grade sterilization infrastructure, a flagship location, and a 5-month runway budgeted before it turns a profit, can require capital expenditure north of $250,000 with total funding needs, including the cash buffer to survive the ramp-up period, pushing past $600,000. Compared to a car wash or a private island, this is a relatively cheap business to start. But here's the part that catches almost every first-time owner off guard. Cheap to open does not mean cheap to run, and the gap between those two numbers is where most tattoo shops actually die. So you've signed your lease, hung your license on the wall, and technically you are now a tattoo shop owner. Congratulations! Before a single client sits down, you have a set of problems that a normal retail business simply does not have. The first problem is compliance. A shop or establishment license from your local health department is mandatory in most jurisdictions, and it isn't a one-time box to check. Inspections can happen without warning, and in some areas the approval process alone takes weeks, which means signing a lease before you've confirmed the space can legally be permitted as a tattoo facility is one of the most common and most expensive mistakes a new owner makes. The second problem is sterilization. Autoclaves, medical-grade cleaning protocols, single-use disposables for every single client. This isn't optional overhead you can trim in a slow month. It's the line item that keeps your license, and it needs replacing and servicing on a schedule, regardless of how many clients walk through the door. The third problem is insurance. General liability, professional liability for every artist working under your roof, and in many cases specific coverage for bloodborne pathogen exposure. If a client has an adverse reaction or an infection traces back to your shop, standard business insurance often doesn't cover it, and the specialty policies that do are neither cheap nor simple to obtain. The fourth problem is your artists themselves. Talented tattoo artists build their own personal client base, their own following, their own reputation, largely independent of your shop's brand, which means the asset that actually drives your revenue can, and often does, walk out the door and take their clients with them. Let's say you've solved the big problems. You have your license, your sterilization room, your insurance. Now let's talk about what it costs every month, regardless of how many appointments get booked. Rent for a 500 to 1,200 square foot shop typically runs $1,000 to $5,000 a month depending on your market, with prime city locations landing at the high end purely because foot traffic and walk-in business are so central to how tattoo shops actually generate revenue. Add utilities, biohazard waste disposal, ongoing supply restocking for disposables and ink, and payment processing fees, and your baseline monthly overhead before paying a single artist can easily clear several $1,000s. And this is the part that quietly sinks undercapitalized owners. A slow month doesn't slow down your rent. A financial model built around a realistic ramp-up period projects it can take roughly 5 months of operating losses before a well-run shop turns cash flow positive, which means you need a working capital buffer sitting in the bank on day one, not a plan to figure it out as you go. Here is where the tattoo shop business gets genuinely interesting, because almost nobody outside the industry understands how the money actually splits. There are two dominant models. The first is commission, where the artist keeps a percentage of every tattoo they do, typically somewhere between 40 and 60%, with 60-40 in the artist's favor being the most common industry standard. The shop absorbs more risk under this model, but also captures more upside when business is strong. The second is booth rental, where an artist simply pays a flat weekly or monthly fee, sometimes just a few $100s, sometimes well over $1,000 in a major city, and keeps 100% of everything they earn. Here's the number that changes everything. An artist bringing in $6,000 a month keeps $3,000 under a 50-50 commission split. Under booth rental at $600 a month rent, that same artist keeps $5,400. For a busy established artist, booth rental wins by a wide margin, which is exactly why the most in-demand artists increasingly push shop owners toward rental arrangements instead of commission. But that same math cuts directly against the shop owner. A shop full of high-earning booth renters isn't participating in the upside of a good month at all. It's just collecting fixed rent regardless of how much money moved through the chair next to the front desk, which means the owner's real revenue engine isn't talent. It's occupancy. An empty station generates nothing. A shop with 5 stations paying $1,000 a month each in booth rent generates $60,000 a year in pure rental income before the owner has tattooed a single client themselves. There are really two types of people who end up owning tattoo shops, and their businesses look almost nothing alike. The first is the owner-artist, someone who tattoos clients themselves and also owns the shop. This owner has two income streams. Their own service revenue, which for an established artist charging around $150 an hour across 25 tattooing hours a week, can approach $200,000 a year before expenses, plus whatever commission or rental income comes from other artists working under their roof. For this owner, the ceiling is high, but so is the workload. Their income is capped by how many hours a human hand can physically tattoo. The second is the pure business owner, someone who doesn't tattoo at all and runs the shop purely as infrastructure. This owner's income scales entirely with how many stations they can keep occupied with working artists and how well they can retain talent before it walks across town to open a competing shop. This owner never hits a physical ceiling on income the way a working artist does, but they're also completely dependent on other people's talent and reputation to generate every dollar of revenue. Let's run the numbers on a mid-size 4-station shop in a decent city market, open for $50,000 in startup costs. The optimistic scenario: all 4 stations fill with steady, established artists on a 60-40 commission split within the first 6 months. Combined, they generate $40,000 a month in tattoo revenue. Your 40% share is $16,000 a month. After rent, supplies, insurance, and overhead of roughly $7,000 a month, you're netting around $9,000 a month, or a little over $100,000 a year. At that pace, you recoup your $50,000 startup investment inside the first year. The realistic scenario: it takes you 8 months, not 6, to fill all 4 stations, because good artists are hard to find and harder to keep. 2 months in, your best artist, the one generating a third of your shop's revenue, gets a better offer across town and leaves, taking a loyal client base with them. Revenue drops to $22,000 a month, while your fixed overhead stays exactly where it was. Your net income falls to roughly $2,000 a month, and the runway you budgeted for a 5-month ramp-up stretches toward a year before you're consistently profitable. The difference between those two outcomes isn't your equipment or your license. It's whether you can find and keep talent that other shops want just as badly as you do. Owning a tattoo shop is not a creative business wearing a business license. It is a licensed, health department-regulated facility, a landlord relationship with a group of independent artists who owe you nothing beyond their rent or their split, and a revenue model that lives or dies on talent retention rather than equipment or square footage. The $15,000 home studio and the $600,000 flagship concept are the same business wearing different clothes. A bet that skilled artists will keep choosing your chairs over someone else's, that your license stays current, and that the client walking in today doesn't leave with your best artist's business card in their pocket for next time. For the owner who understands that they're really in the business of attracting and retaining talent, not tattooing, a shop can be one of the more resilient small businesses in the creative economy. For the owner who thinks the ink and the artwork are the product, it's an expensive way to discover that the real product was always the chair, the license, and the name on the door.